Today I'm going to break down what a commercial valuation is, how a valuer would calculate a commercial valuation, and what your property needs to be to get that commercial valuation. Watch on. Hi, I'm Vic from My HMO. Let's take a look at what your property needs to be to get a commercial valuation. I'm going to use a HMO as an example here, right? Because you can't just rock up to a valuer with a normal property, one bedroom, and say, I want a commercial valuation on it. It doesn't work like that. There are some rules that your property needs to follow in order to be eligible for a commercial valuation. Let's just run through those. First, your property needs to look and feel different to a residential home, right? That is why it will get a commercial valuation. That's why it will be different. It needs to be so different that it can't easily be converted back into a residential home. This is why people are having some challenges with HMOs, right? I've had when you've got maybe sharing facilities, sharing bathrooms, sharing kitchens. I mean, effectively what you're doing is putting a bed in a lounge, in a living room, and calling it a bedroom. You can get back to a family home really, really quickly, right? However, if you take something like my latest development, where we're creating 5 en-suites with kitchenettes, the previous owner could walk back into that house and they lived there for about 30 years, right? Family man, raised his family there. They wouldn't recognize the property. It looks completely different. Every room has its own bathroom. It looks like 5 studio flats. So that's something you cannot easily reverse the work we've done. We're spending over 100K on it. Can't easily reverse that back into a family home. So that's rule number 2. Next, the income that you're receiving on that property needs to be substantially different to what you would receive on a residential home. So if you've got a 3-bedroom property, for example, and you start letting out each property individually, in London, you're probably going to get about £1,000 a room, let's say, maybe slightly less if they're shared facilities. So we're talking about 3K, let's call it. You can earn 2.5K rent per month on a residential family home. So there's not a substantial difference. You're not going to get a commercial valuation for something like that. However, if you've got 5 en-suite bedrooms like the property we're developing, go and take a look on our Instagram. If you've got the 5-bedroom property that I'm currently developing, well, we're going to get £1,100 a month per room for that property. Your gross rental income is going to be £5,500. If I just let the property out as I bought it as a 3-bedroom family home, I would have got less than half of that rental income. So your income is going to be substantially different to what a residential home would get. If you're in the Article 4 area, then you're far more likely to get a commercial valuation. This is because there's a massive barrier to entry, right? For more HMOs to come into the area, and you have a unique proposition. I think there's a theme here, right? Where your property needs to be quite unique from everything else on the street. Yeah, there might be other HMOs, but for 80% of the properties in that area or on that road, your property is going to be very, very different. Then the valuer starts looking at actually what demand is there in the area. And a lot of people are going out, they're getting social housing contracts. I've got a HMO on a social housing contract. But what the valuer will actually be looking at to value your property is there a demand for working professional HMOs? They'll be thinking around the fact that, well, if something goes wrong here and we need to repossess this property, what can we get on the rental market for it very easily without no headache? There needs to be that demand for working professionals to rent rooms in your HMO. And with all of that said, it's subject to a valuer's opinion, right? I've seen lots of different ways of valuers valuing HMOs, but if you follow these specific rules, then I don't think you're going to go far wrong. Right, so now let's jump into the maths of what exactly a valuer is doing and how commercial valuations work. Right, so let's use a 6-bedroom HMO as an example. We're just going to assume here you're getting £1,000 per room rent, so your annual rent is £6,000. Good, so annual rent, £6,000 times 12 is £72,000, right? Still pretty straightforward. Then a valuer will knock 10 to 15% off your gross rental income. This is the cost of running the property, your council tax, your utilities, your broadband, your cleaning, your water, all of these things. They'll then get to a figure. This is where it gets a little bit subjective, and a valuer might apply 10, might apply 15, could even apply 20%. As a valuer will deduct between 10 and 15% of cost, we're just going to use 12.5%, right? Because it's in the middle for this example, nice and clean. So 12.5% of £72,000 is £9,000. So that's going to come straight off your gross income. So you're left with an income of £63,000 that the valuer is looking at. They then will apply a yield for the area that your property is in. This is when it becomes super subjective. Of course, very simple example, but yield of a property in Hull will be completely different to that of a property in London, right? Everybody knows that because the property values are different, the income you're getting is different. So in London, we're getting between 8 and 10% yields. Most of my HMOs have had 8.5%, which is really good. So we're going to use that in this example. So you get your 63,000 net rent that you're left with, you divide it by 8.5% and you've got your commercial valuation. That's just over 740k, not bad for a day's work, plus the HMO is going to be giving you income. So I hope that was useful. It definitely was useful for me just to learn how commercial valuations work. If you like that content, please give us a like, subscribe. There's going to be lots more content like this coming up. See you later.